Welcome to this AP video tutorial on how to approach stimulus-based multiple choice questions. Okay, that's a lot to say, but there's a reason why we're going to say it. So in the past, you're kind of used to what's known as standard-based multiple choice questions. What are those? So you probably remember in most cases when you went in to take a test for a class, you would get something that looked a little bit like this. A standard-based multiple choice question is just the question itself and 4 answers right after it. Now, a lot of times those could be just basic memorization questions, and sometimes they could be a lot more complicated. They're a little bit more difficult to approach. But AP tests aren't structured that way. AP tests are not standard-based multiple choice. They're what they're called stimulus-based multiple choice questions. What the heck is that? So stimulus-based multiple choice question means this. You're going to get a stimulus. Now, a stimulus could be a written passage. It could be a chart, or it could be a picture. You're then going to be asked a really tough and challenging question about it. And the biggest mistake students can make is to think that they're just going to remember what they studied about in class and see the answer in the choices. That's not how it works. In a stimulus-based multiple choice question, you get 4 answers, kind of typical, right? But 3 of those answers are what we call distractors, meaning they're pretty typically true to history. They just don't work for this particular question. And this makes it kind of tough. Most students who approach these tests and these questions, they kind of fumble. And the reason why is they're waiting for that old standard-based multiple choice where they're just going to see the answer that they studied in class. You just can't approach it that way. So let's dive into a method that might help you out a little bit more. Okay, so here's the method you want to use when you approach stimulus-based multiple choice questions. First, let's start here. You're not looking for the right answer. You're looking for the best possible answer. Now, I know that seems strange, but that mindset's really important. If you look for the right answer, you're going to get kind of confused because a lot of the answers are going to look right because they're historically true, but they don't fit for the passage. Okay, how do we narrow this down to make this happen? First place you always look to, big mistake students make. Don't look to the passage, look to the question. Why do you want to look at the question? Because the question will tell you what the historical thinking skill, the content, and the time period are. That's what you want to look for when you're looking at the question. Next up, again, don't look at the passage, look at the source of the passage. The source of the passage is going to give you a lot of context clues about the passage. Just by looking at the author's name, looking at the title of the work, looking at the year, you can tell a lot about what this passage is going to be about. Okay, now you get to read the passage, but you're going to scan the passage. You're not going to read it in detail. You're scanning it and skimming it for the overall idea. Okay, final step that you want to do, go into the answer choices and do process of elimination. I know you're going to want to look for the right answer, but remember what I told you, there are a lot of good answers here. We want to eliminate the ones that don't fit. How are we going to eliminate? Well, there are 3 big categories that you can eliminate off of. Number 1, wrong time period. A lot of times some of the answers that are being given that are distractors are true to history, but are outside of the time period that you're looking at. Number 2, the wrong actor. Okay, what does that mean? The action might be true in history, but it's not true for the actor in the passage. It's being done tricky a little bit there. And last off is number 3. The answer is right for history, but it's not relevant to what the question's asking, either in its time period, content, or its historical thinking skill. Okay, now you choose the best possible answer, and that's your method. So again, look to the question number 1, look to the source number 2, skim the passage, number 3 for your answers, and then do process elimination. Okay, so now let's take a look at it. Oh, a little bit of a costume change. You can kind of tell I do these things over several days, just for you. Anyways, let's take a look at an example really quick of how to approach stimulus-based multiple choice questions. So in AP World History, we're going to deal with a question dealing with a guy named Ibn Battuta. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Ibn Battuta to set the context before we jump to the question, because actually that's what's going to help you to answer questions when you face stimulus-based multiple choice. Ibn Battuta lived during about the 1400s. And Ibn Battuta is really important because he's sort of our first world traveler and explorer. He explored all the way from China all the way out to Western Africa. He was born in Saudi Arabia. In the Islamic world, he was known as what's called a qadi, or a judge. He would go from place to place, and his job was to offer interpretations on how to solve problems. Remember, we talked about how Islam is really a religion of rules. It's a religion of legal pronouncements from Allah. It was the Qadi's job to go from place to place to resolve things based upon the Quran. And in fact, here's the interesting thing. Ibn Battuta said once that the only time he ever faced violence in his trips from Eastern China all the way over to Western Africa was one time up in the northern part of India when he was traveling on the Silk Roads. That's it. Across that entire area in the 1400s, he never faced any major parts of violence except for that one time. What that says is that these Islamic empires were united by the Islamic laws coming from the Quran. But as we're going to see, there was also major differences when it came to culture. Let's take a look at that example. So the very first place that we're always going to take a look at is the question first. And in this case, the question for this particular prompt is going to be the purpose of Ibn Battuta's account was most likely to. What's our historical thinking skill? Well, in this case, what we're looking for is the purpose. Why did he write this? Not what he said, but why did he write this? Okay, our second place we want to go to is the source line. In this case, we have Ibn Battuta, Muslim traveler from North Africa, account of his journey to China, circa 1345. Okay, notice here what we have. We have Ibn Battuta. Okay, we know a little bit about him, but let's just say for a moment that we forgot. Well, we know he's a Muslim traveler, right, from North Africa. Now, we know a little bit more about him. Okay, that he traveled all the way from Saudi Arabia to East Asia, all the way out to Western Africa. So that gives us some context clues. And remember, he's Muslim, and we know that he's traveled in all these areas as a Qadi, as a judge at this time period. Okay, third thing, let's go ahead and read the passage. So here's what the passage says. After leaving India, we arrived in Sumatra. It's a fertile area in which cocoa palm, clove, Indian aloe, mango, and sweet orange trees grow. Local commerce is facilitated by tin and Chinese gold. The Sultan was informed of our visit and sent the judge and experts on Islamic law to meet me. The Sultan is an illustrious and generous ruler and a patron of religious scholars. He's constantly waging war against the non-Muslims of Sumatra, but is a humble man who walks on foot to Friday prayers. The non-Muslims of the area must pay poll tax to obtain peace. In other words, what he's talking about here is that the Muslim world, going all the way from China out into Western Africa, is a pretty diverse area. And out in China, the area that's out there has a ton of resources with a powerful but peaceful leader who taxes those who are non-Muslim, but who treats them with justice. So this is a positive tone praising Muslim leaders out in China. Okay, now let's go and let's try and get rid of some of these answers. So if you look to answer number A, glorify himself by exaggerating the influence he'd obtained over local rulers in Southeast Asia. Well, yeah, that talks about purpose. That's not just repeating the article. But nowhere in this passage do we see Ibn Battuta glorifying himself. It's just not relevant to the passage. Okay, B, warn Muslim merchants that China was becoming dominant in the commerce in the Indian Ocean. Okay, again, that's true to history. Absolutely, China became dominant at this time period, but it's not relevant to the tone of the passage, so we can get rid of B. C, encourage fellow Muslims in North Africa to participate more in maritime commerce. Well, it is true. There were Muslims in North Africa. He did visit into North Africa. All that's true to history. But nowhere in this passage do we see him encouraging people in North Africa to participate. He's talking about the glories of China. So C is gone as well. We've gotten rid of A, B, and C. We're left with D. Inform his audience about the cultural, political, and economic characteristics of the places he visited. That definitely fits for purpose, and it definitely fits the overall tone of the passage. He's talking about these amazing diversity of economic characteristics, cultural characteristics, political characteristics in China, were the Muslim emperor there. So again, notice what we got here and how we approach these types of questions. We start off with the question itself to figure out what the thinking skill is. We then look at the source to get some context clues. We read over the passage to get the overall idea and tone. And then we go ahead and eliminate A, B, C, and D as distractors, and then choose our best possible answer. There's your example for AP World History.